Welcome to the Winner's Playbook with Steve and Josh. Disclaimer: the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal circumstances. Please head to the show notes if you wish to book a free 15-minute call to discuss your personal situation.
Okay, guys, welcome back to the Winners Playbook. I'm Steve. I'm here with Josh. Josh, how you going this week, mate?
Very good, mate. It's been a busy week as always. Plenty happening in the markets, plenty happening in the world, and just keeping us busy. How's it been on your end?
Yeah, good. As we run up to Christmas, there's lots of meetings going on, lots of reviews, which is all good fun. But it's amazing how fast this time of year just disappears on us.
Oh, 100%. And I think just with all the things going around the world, it just, time just absolutely flies by and just keeps us on our toes, keeps us interesting, which is what we love.
Yeah, and just on that, we're doing a lot of reviews, and obviously we look after superannuation as financial advisors quite a bit, and markets haven't been that favourable to us over the last 12 or 18 months, and as we're doing these reviews. Mate, what's your take on superannuation at the minute? And I think today's topic is really about, is superannuation a scam?
Yeah, so superannuation, that connotation that superannuation is a scam, I think is wrong, and it's something I actually see a lot on social media. A lot, obviously, we do so much on social media, and I get so many comments around whenever I'm talking about superannuation, people saying, don't put your money in superannuation, go buy a property instead, pull your money out of superannuation as best as you can. But, as financial advisors, we absolutely love superannuation as an investment vehicle. And there's a lot of reasons for it. For one, it's a good investment structure. It's probably the most tax efficient investment structure that you can actually invest in here in Australia. But I suppose before we get into some of the pros and cons of it, for people just to understand the superannuation system, it's probably one of the best retirement systems around the world. It's definitely the best that I've ever seen. And the key parts that you need to understand in relation to your superannuation is you can add any extra money to that account. It's essentially a retirement account, so it's for your future retirement, and that was really the purpose of superannuation and why it was introduced in the first place, is to, I suppose, take away some of the stresses on the government and the age pension and Centrelink. So not everyone is going to have to be reliant upon the age pension or Centrelink in retirement, and people can essentially, ideally get to a point where they're living a self-funded lifestyle, so to speak. So you have your mandated contributions that your employer has to put in, which currently sits at 11%. That was obviously a lot lower in the previous years and is steadily rising up to, I think, about 12% in July 1st, 2025, and that's where it's supposed to be sitting. And a portion of your pay, every pay that you get, goes in there. That money hits your superannuation fund. It's invested, and it's done so in an incredibly low taxed environment as well. So there's definitely some huge misconceptions, I think, in relation to superannuation. And Steve, throw on to you. What are some of your thoughts initially, and what are some of the things you hear from clients talking about super? Are they apprehensive around putting money in there, or is there a bit of a sort of a negative view of super in a way?
Oh, I think as people get closer to the point they can access it, it becomes a lot more favourable. And the conversation with someone in their 20s and 30s, maybe early 40s, it seems to be very different to people in late 40s and 50s and 60s with super. So
Yeah.
I think, as people get more educated on what superannuation is, that helps, and that's part of our job, is to really provide that education.
Yeah.
I think with anything, it's a balanced approach. You've got to have money, different investment vehicles across your journey, and superannuation's one of those. And as you said, it's a very, very, very good investment vehicle, especially for that tax. And I think people have to remember, superannuation is just a tax structure. I think people get caught up in seeing the media and the hype and sometimes around superannuation and what is it and the scams going on and things like that. But realistically, it's just a way to save tax. So it's as simple as that. And I think people just got to cut out the noise with super sometimes.
Yeah.
And realistically, I think if you're going to buy something for the very long term, for your future wealth, then you'd have to consider superannuation, because that's all it is. It's a long-term holding vehicle, because you can't get the money out till you're 60. But the closer you get to that 60 years of age, obviously it becomes a lot more favourable. But I think the plans that we do, or I've been looking at a lot recently with clients, we definitely have a balanced approach with super. It's definitely part of every plan we do, but it's also in the mix with investing money in other spots outside superannuation. So you've got that pathway. and you can go from there. But mate, obviously we see a lot of media around super. A lot of TV, the advertisements on super, a lot of the retail funds versus industry funds and all that going on in the media. How do you reckon that's impacted people's views on superannuation in general?
Yeah, that's, some of that I suppose definitely doesn't help. And just, talking to the industry fund versus retail fund, us as financial advisors, we can use any product that we want, and ultimately it's going to come down to what is the best structure for our clients. But, really when you look at it, I think that's a little bit of, just good marketing from some of the sides there, in terms of, sort of sledging each other in a way, because there are some key differences between industry and retail funds. Talking to that point, industry funds, that they tend to have a pretty basic sort of menu of investment options to select from. That's not a bad thing. That can be great for certain people, but there's also, then you compare it to a retail fund that tends to be a lot more broad in terms of what you can actually invest in. There's a lot more options in relation to it, and definitely a lot of our clients do like that flexibility, and don't want to just go for the stock standard approach. So I think definitely the media loves to stir up that sort of debate, so to speak. But I also think it's a bit of on the government as well, and that's where I think some of the apprehension probably from the public comes from, is the government changing the rules in relation to superannuation, and we've obviously seen that quite a fair bit.
Yeah.
Over the years, and some of the notable ones of how much money you could get into superannuation previously, and that's been sort of steadily coming down and being reduced. So I think that's where some of that worriedness comes around superannuation, is around yes, what you're seeing out there in the media, but then also some of what the government's doing, and there are talks of changes now as we currently speak. And that kind of, I think, second guesses people around superannuation in some way, with the worry that I've definitely seen this before, where people think that the government could just take your money at any point in time. So if you hear that, Steve, like what do you say to people? Like, is superannuation, is it a safe product, so to speak, or a safe structure? Is it properly regulated? Because that's definitely something that I hear from people often.
Yeah, look, at like any structure in the tax system, it's going to get slightly adjusted over time. It's that has to happen for society and the economy. We can't continue one track forever. So I think people have to expect there's going to be some slight adjustments. I've never seen in my whole career significant changes that make it a less of an attractive vehicle to invest in. So it's as simple as that. So it doesn't matter where your money is parked at any time. There's going to be adjustments, and I think people just need to expect that that's going to occur. We're in a society that's run by two very, very stable governments, so we're not operating in an emerging market here. So realistically, the chances of significant change to make it to the point where it's not attractive is just unrealistic. And I say that to clients. I've travelled the world, seen many economies in my time, and we're one of the best run economies in the world. It's as simple as that. So that fallacy is really doesn't work. So that's what I say. And I think we just open the conversation with clients, especially around investments. If I get into the detail of what you can invest in with super, it's really anything. So as long as it's for your retirement purposes, you can invest in whatever you want. If you see a decent, if it's property or shares or managed funds or exchange traded funds or artwork or whatever it may be, you can really invest in whatever you want. And that's the simple fact of the matter is it's just an investment vehicle. But it's just taxed very, very favorably, considering our normal tax rates that we pay. So yeah, that's the position I have with clients. And if I throw it back to you, Josh, in terms of the detail around the tax, if you could, what's the tax rates and how does that all work with super?
Yeah, so talking tax relating to superannuation. So I suppose there's two buckets to break this up in. Is the accumulation phase of superannuation, which is when you're building your account. So call it, say, when you start work at maybe age 18, and then you get up to around about age 60. And obviously a lot of people still work beyond age 60 these days, but that age 60 is a real critical point for superannuation purposes. So really from age 18 through to age 60, you're in the accumulation phase of super. Any money you have in your account is taxed at a maximum rate of 15%. And that's referring to the earnings. So if you've got some shares in there, maybe some property, some infrastructure, some bonds, or whatever it may be in your investment portfolio through your super fund, that's all going to be taxed at a maximum rate of 15% when we're referring to the earnings or the income on the funds. Now, talking about capital gains is slightly different. So you're still going to be taxed at 15% if you were to sell an asset within a 12-month period of time. However, if you own an asset over a 12-month period of time, that capital gains tax rate goes from 15% down to 10%. So again, it is by far the lowest taxed environment you can invest in here in Australia. And that's where it can, I suppose, become particularly appealing for, we do a lot of work around self-managed super funds with clients and talking about the tax efficiency of that. If we take the view of an investment property, if you take a simple example of someone, having an investment property and selling it in their own name and paying a capital gain, they could be paying tax up to the highest marginal tax rate of 47%, including the Medicare levy, which is huge. When you compare that to doing it through your superannuation, you could be paying just 10%. So the tax in the accumulation phase is incredibly appealing, but then you go one step further, and once you get over age 60, it can be a tax-free environment. So from 60 onwards, a few different conditions to trigger that. One is you just permanently retire, or another option could be is you retire for a period of time and maybe you end up going back to work, but it needs to be over age 60. And once that is then done, what we do as advisors is we set our clients up in what's called a pension or an allocated pension account. There's a few different names for it. But then what that then means is all of the money in your superannuation at that point in time becomes entirely tax-free, which is a huge benefit. These days, you can have up to $1.9 million per person. So between a couple, $1.9 million each in a tax-free account, and you just can't beat it. You can't beat that tax-free environment. When you compare it to some of the, the other structures that we do a lot of work around, family trusts, companies or investment bonds, none of those are a tax-free environment, whereas superannuation is. So when people say is superannuation a scam, I respond back and say, well, superannuation is actually more of a tax haven, is what superannuation is. So you can't argue with the taxation in relation to superannuation, and that is by far the best benefit. But what about, Steve? That's tax on the fund itself once it's getting in. But what are some of the things that we do with clients around tax deductions and putting money into superannuation?
Yeah. Right. Just on that, you can't beat zero tax, can you?
No.
I think people forget that.
No.
Look, so when clients come to us, say you're in your 30s or 40s, and you're building wealth, and we deal a lot of clients want to just build wealth. The strategies definitely entail always, as I said before, investing inside super and investing outside super. We don't want to tie it all up to a 60 because we might want to have a change of lifestyle and reduce work in our 50s, so we want access to cash at that point. So it's just about having that balance view to start with, and I think a good advisor should take that approach of a very balanced approach when clients come to you with goals, because those goals can change over time. So we don't want to get to the point where we're sort of allocating all our capital to an investment that you can't access to your 60. But in saying that, then and having that open view, some of the strategies we may do is, you got consent, you can put $27,500 into super per year per person, and you can get the full tax deduction. So that does include your work contributions that your employer puts in for you, but we may top up that for a client and really take those benefits, especially if there's lots of free cash flow. So if we've got lots of cash flow, after our expenses are being paid, after some investments outside super, etc., that's a very good strategy. There's also spouse contributions. So if there's someone that's on a lower salary to the other party, we may do a spouse contribution. You can do $3,000 into a spouse contribution and get a tax rebate of about $540. So just simple things like that. Just each year, when the time's right, it can really help you out with your balances and tax. And then look, if we need to really lift up the super. So for some, in some cases, we may have a couple of clients that really want to go out there and buy property with their super, but they might not have the balance to do it. We may look at a debt restructure on their home loan, pull out some equity out of that, do a big contribution of $330,000 into super to really lift it up, and allows them to go out there and buy an investment property portfolio. So, there's that type of strategy. So really get quite, not tricky, but you can really open up the options if you sit down with the right advisor and get the right advice how to build wealth. So there's plenty of good things out there, but it's all, as we said multiple times in these podcasts, it's about the right plan for the right person. There's
Yep.
no set way to do this, and everyone is going to be slightly different
Yep.
about what triggers to pull at the right time,
Yep.
and adjust it over time.
What about the little unknown one that it's only sort of come in, I think, in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, the carry forward unused contribution rule. Like I know personally, I've worked with some clients, have managed to put in, because you mentioned before, $27,500 is the concessional contribution cap, which is where you can get that tax deduction. But with the use of the carry forward contribution rule, I've worked with a couple of clients, and one client in particular who was working overseas for quite a few years, and they weren't contributing for those years that they were overseas. So they essentially had this mass of unused contribution cap. And for anyone listening, so you understand how that works, is you can put in $27,500 as a concessional, or what's called a pre-tax contribution, in which, Steve, you said employer contributions are a part of that, and any salary sacrifice contributions you make. But what happens is, if you don't reach the $27,500 limit every year, that unused amount gets carried forward into the preceding or the next year. And that can happen up for a period of 5 years, providing your balance is below $500,000. That's the key trigger that you have to look out for here. But I did have a couple of clients that I had worked with who sold an investment property in a financial year. They just returned back to Australia, and they had a huge unused concessional contribution cap. And I think between the two of them, from memory, we got approximately 120 to 130,000 into super between the two of them in 1 year. They claimed it all back as a tax deduction, and conservatively, from my memory, I think their tax savings from it were about 30 to 40K in one
Yeah.
year, which was just huge, and they were over the moon for it. So the government does encourage you and reward you for this, and to the point that, again, they don't want the society to be reliant upon them in the future, and they want people to actually be able to sort of live life on their own terms. So there's a lot of positives to it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think also what's important there is, as you just said, it's only recently came in, and I think that's where an advisor really keeps you up to date with those changes and what you can do and the
Yeah.
options, and because the financial world changes, and it changes quite frequently. So just having someone to call on and give you those updates is crucial.
Yeah.
And Josh, what mate, you've seen a lot of clients, you deal with a lot of clients at Link and in
Yeah.
your career. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see with people if they're trying to do something with super? What have you seen in the past, maybe before they've got to you?
Yeah, I guess multiple super funds. It's not probably as common anymore because some of the government rules, and they're trying to clean up that. But I've seen some clients with I think the most I've seen, one client had 8 superannuation funds, which is just ridiculous because
Yeah,
you're paying a fee on every single one of those. So the multiple superannuation funds, it's less common these days because the government's got those clean up rules where if you have a low balance, it kind of all gets consolidated in there. But I guess one of the biggest mistakes I tend to see is people just not paying any attention to their superannuation whatsoever, and not really knowing how it works. And when you join a superannuation fund, if you take no notice of it, you just go into the default option, investment option. And the investment option is probably the most critical part of your super, because it's going to drive how fast your fund grows, so to speak, and the types of returns that you get. So when you join a superannuation fund, you generally will go into their default option, which is usually what's called a balanced option. Now, if you're quite young, you might want to be in a more aggressive type investment option, and therefore a balanced type approach is maybe not too suitable for you because it's maybe a little bit more conservative, and therefore you're probably not going to get as high of a return over the longer term. Whereas if you're maybe a little bit older, you're getting closer to retirement, the balanced option might even then be too aggressive as well. So not looking at your investment options and understanding what your money's doing, I think, is the biggest thing I see, which is an issue, because a lot of people just sit there in that default option. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's generally not actually tailored to their needs, so to speak. So I think that's a big one to watch. And also, to the multiple super fund point, a lot of people, when you're moving employers, they forget to actually keep with their same fund, and they generally end up going to their new employer, and their employer might have a preferred fund, and they just open up and go with it, or they don't even think about comparing the fees or comparing the accounts or understanding the differences between them, and they just bounce between funds like it doesn't really mean anything. And you've got to be very careful of that, because fees are going to be different on all of them. Investment options are always going to be different, but you've also got some insurance in your super fund generally as well, which is something that you've got to watch out for, because when you leave a superannuation fund, your insurance will be cancelled once you exit that fund. So it's something that I always say for people if they're looking at their superannuation and maybe they've got multiple funds and they're trying to clean them up and put them into one. It's not as simple as just clicking the button, picking the one that has the biggest account balance. You got to look at the benefits of all of the funds and what insurance they might hold as well as a really important part of it. Because if you've got health issues in particular, you might not want to lose that insurance. And some of the insurance you might have in there would be life insurance, total disability insurance, and income protection. So there's a lot to know about superannuation, and I think for anyone's benefit, when your superannuation statement comes through every year, don't just look at the headline balance. Like, actually, maybe take a bit of a read through it and understand some of the basic ins and outs. Like, how much did it grow? How is your money invested? How much contributions did you go in? Did you have insurance through the fund? And what's it sort of doing? So I think just paying attention to it is just actually, and don't save it too late, because I think that's what a lot of people, particularly in my generation, do, is they kind of put it in the back drawer and think, I don't need to worry about this until I'm 60. And I see a lot of people that have done that, whereas if they just started paying attention to it a little bit sooner, they could have been in a significantly better position and, have hundreds of thousands of dollars more in their account by the time that they actually get to retirement. And I guess I don't know how you approach it, Steve. So, like, what do you try to do with clients in relation to, like, how do you talk about it with the younger generation? Like, I know I have a bit of an approach for the younger ones and how we talk about super and do we add extra money or do we not? But do you have many clients in their, say, 20s or 30s that tend to put extra money into their superannuation at all, or do you tend to probably look at it in the 40s and 50s?
Look, I definitely we look at it in their 20s and 30s, and what I've actually changed my way of approaching clients of that age group over the journey, and now I paint the picture of what we
Mm.
can do with it once their balance is up. So, once they've got a bigger balance in their
Yeah.
30s or whatever it may be, I paint the picture of what are some of the options we can then do with
Yeah.
their money, and that gets them excited. So it's probably
Yeah.
not about what's happening right now because they see a smaller balance and they're like,
Mm.
well, I can't touch it till I'm X, and what's the point type of thing. But then I just explain to them, okay, well, once we get this balance up a bit by doing a couple of small little increments, maybe a bit of salary sacrifice or whatever it may be, what are the options that open up then that you can invest in? And that gets them quite excited. So whether that's property or in other types of investments or whatever it may be. And so
Yeah.
I just paint that picture for them to give them an understanding of what their options are, and that tends to get the conversation a bit more flowing, if you like.
Mm. Interesting. What about for self-employeds? Obviously, we're both in business. How do you typically see? Because I know, self-employeds are probably the category that least want to, look after or
Yeah.
care about their superannuation. And first of all, Steve, you've been in business. Why is that? Why do people that are self-employed tend to neglect super? Why is that?
Variety of reasons. I think cash flow, like people are worried about cash flow. So they go, well, I've got to save the cash, but because in case something happens, I need to spend it on the business.
Yeah.
They invest all their money in the business. Generally business owners put everything into their business. So they tend to steer away from the superannuation fund. And I think it's because it's locked up, and they're worried about the business and something happening in a couple of years' time where they need access to capital. So I think there's a variety of reasons there that business owners don't do it, and our job is to explain to them obviously the tax savings and the long-term benefits of doing so, and business owners can maybe buy their own premises within to operate out of, so that can be quite beneficial.
Yeah.
But it is a different conversation with business owners,
Yeah.
and as advisors we need to adapt to that. But yeah, it's about just having the balanced approach across the board in all these conversations. And as we've said a couple of times, everyone's going to be slightly different of
Mm.
how superannuation fits into the overall portfolio. But in saying that, it really should become part of the conversation for every conversation. It's just how do you approach it?
Yeah, I think it's 100% what you said there. It has a place in every financial plan that we're doing, like
Yeah.
you did say earlier. And I think the way I like to approach it, particularly for the younger clients, is, a lot of people I am working with nowadays, they do want to have flexibility in their 50s. And that's where the drawback of putting money to superannuation sometimes comes from, is because you cannot access it until earliest age 60. So then, well, how do we get to a period or place of financial freedom in our 50s? Well, that's where the focus needs to be on about building your assets outside of your superannuation. And that could be, investment portfolios, shares, managed funds, ETFs, etc., investment properties and things like that. So, when I'm generally approaching with my younger clients, my initial focus is more so getting action on that side of the fence, so to speak. Because I guess for the younger ones as well is, superannuation hasn't been around forever, and now because of the way the system is, as soon as you go into the workforce, you're mandated to have contributions going into your funds. So even if you're earning an average wage, you're generally still going to tend to build up a pretty decent balance by the time that you're age 60. So the way I like to approach it with a lot of the younger clients is we focus a fair amount more on building the wealth outside of superannuation in most cases initially,
Yep.
because they maybe want to get to their 50s and not retire. I think it's how people think about retirement here in Australia is that it's not necessarily right. I think
Yep.
my definition of retirement or financial freedom, and what a lot of clients want that I work with, is to be able to not necessarily stop work and do nothing and sit on a beach sipping pina coladas every week. I don't know if you want to do that, Steve.
Oh, that's
Possibly. But it's more about being able to do what you want when you want and live life on your own terms, and not have to get up and go work 9 to 5 or whatever the hours are going to be. Because when you're in your 50s, you still got energy. You still want to get
yeah,
out there and do stuff. Like, you got to find another passion. You can't just stop. You can't work all of your life and then expect to stop and do nothing, because you'll
yeah,
lose your mind. And I've seen that happen with clients who have
totally.
you work for 40 years and then you stop, and
Yeah,
you can't just kick up and sit on the couch
no,
all day. And so clients really want to get that ability to have that financial freedom in their 50s. So it is about building a lot of that wealth outside super. But then super is still going to have its place, because as soon as I hit age 60,
yeah.
it's going to be a primary source of income for them. And I guess talking to that point, Steve, like what happens? So once you convert, as we said earlier, to a retirement account, like, how does it work in getting money out of it? And can you just take as what you want? What do people generally do with once they get to retirement with their super fund?
Yeah, pretty much. Look, it pretty much rolls into a bank account that's tax free, and you can just take your tax free income. Setting it up, the structure's got to be important here, because you need a separate cash account really to the investment accounts, because you need that cash account to be able to pay you income.
Yeah,
So it's really important to get the right advice to set it up properly, so you've got that all organised. But effectively, that's what we do. We set it up so it's still invest in the markets, because you don't want to come out of the markets, because you still want to keep making money, and you want to be making money tax free. And that's what those pension funds do. They make money tax free as long as you got $1.9 million or less in it. And after that, it's only 15% tax anyway. So,
yeah,
very beneficial to keep making money. But you just want to make sure you got those cash accounts set up, and then just collect your income. And that's what people do, and we just pay them the right amount to supply the money for their lifestyle, and away they go into a happy retirement. But I agree with you, retirement in Australia has changed. It's not
mm,
retirement anymore. It's flexibility to work when I want. That's
yeah,
really retirement. Because the amount of people I see finish work and then go back again, 9 out of 10, to be honest, it's huge. So,
yeah.
and I think that's the way. It's just, how do we get that flexibility with life, whether it's in your 50s or late 40s or whatever it is. It's the flexibility to have life, and that's where superannuation can help with that flexibility
Yeah.
at the right time.
Yes, I think we've kind of debunked that superannuation is definitely not a scam.
Yeah,
It has
yeah,
a place in
yeah,
every financial plan and anyone's, sort of overall portfolio. But, as we always say, it really comes down to your individual circumstances and what you're trying to achieve. Because, like I said, a lot of my younger clients don't tend to put money in super, extra money that is, but I've also got some that do, because they're going to happily work through to age 60, and they have absolutely no desires on retiring sooner, and want to, get some nice tax deductions along the way. So, really, I think the key message is, like with everything that we do, is just find out and, work out what it is for you. Maybe sit down with an advisor or, someone that you're working with, and try and actually lay out what you actually want in life. And that's going to drive what's ultimately best to you. But I think in closing, Steve, what about self-managed super funds? Because there's a bit of a, that I think in the previous years, some professionals and probably oversold them in a way. And I've seen some, pretty poor cases in the past of, accountants and advisors that had recommended self-managed super funds for clients that had very small balances. Like, I've seen people go into them with, $50 to $100,000, not with any of our advice, but done it 10 years ago and did it wrong. I think self-managed super funds are an amazing structure, but they're certainly not for everyone. What are some of the things that you look out for there for a client where it could actually be beneficial for them. And I guess really the main reason why we look at a self-managed super fund is if it makes sense to buy an investment property or a commercial property through it. But you obviously do a lot of work in that space. What are some of the things that you look out for there that clients people might be able to think about that? Hey, is this a structure that I should be considering?
Yeah, look, I think when property's in the mix, if it's a long-term property and it's right, then an SMSF or supplementary super fund definitely comes in the picture with that type of purchase, because property in general is long term. You need to hold it for a long time, and being inside super is very, very tax effective if you sell it at the right time. So definitely that conversation. But the things I look for is balance. As you said before, you don't want to have a low balance with a supplementary super fund. You need to have 300 to 400,000 as a starting point. There's a number of ways you can get the balance up if you need to, but you need to really have that starting point. I'd say also very important to have the education. You need to educate the client, or the clients that we put into them are fairly well abreast of how things work with super, finances in general, and property. So we may not put someone in a summer super fund because they're not quite there yet with that education, and our job is to train them and get them educated to the point where they can open that option. But I think you don't want to stick someone in a summer super fund that it's not right for in terms of where they're at with their finances.
Yeah.
But for the right person, for the right right plan, it definitely an option that needs to be considered, because it gives you that flexibility. You can have multiple members in the fund. It can be very cost effective actually compared to running a normal fund, because these days the cost to run it have come down considerably. And it really does open up every single investment option in the world, because you can actually invest in whatever you want as long as it's for retirement purposes. So there's lots and lots of options. So yeah, I would, if you strongly encourage people to consider them if for the right person and for the right ideas and for the right goals. But yeah, that can be very, very handy.
Yeah, and you can obviously borrow through the self-managed super fund as well, which you can't do through your regular retail or industry fund.
Yeah.
But you can borrow through a self-managed super fund. And when we're talking about borrowing, that's obviously going to be in relation to a commercial or a residential type property. And a lot of people